Okay, we are on Deuteronomy chapter 23. Who would like to start the reading?
I will.
Thank you, Kim. I don't know. There are breaks. I have a break at 8.
I do too.
Me too. Read to 8.
Yes, please. Chapter 23, 1 through 8.
All right. The sanctuary. If a man's testicles are crushed or his penis cut off, he shall not enter the sanctuary. A bastard may not enter the sanctuary, nor any of his descendants for 10 generations. No Ammonite or Moabite may ever enter the sanctuary, even after the 10th generation. The reason for this law is that these nations did not welcome you with food and water when you came out of Egypt. They even tried to hire Balaam, the son of Beor from Pethor, Mesopotamia, to curse you. But the Lord wouldn't listen to Balaam. Instead, he turned the intended curse into a blessing for you because the Lord loves you. He must never, as long as you live, try to help the Ammonites or the Moabites in any way. But don't look down on the Edomites or the Egyptians. The Edomites are your brothers, and you lived among the Egyptians. The grandchildren of the Egyptians who came with you from Egypt may enter the sanctuary of the Lord.
Wow, that's an interesting little connection there. Well, we should pay attention to that because when he says not to ever seek peace with those people, who are they today would be the question.
Yeah.
All right, Cindy, whenever you're ready. We'll see what the commentary says before we go into a bunch of research.
'23. Like an overview of 1 to 6. The assembly of the Lord. From the sanctification of the home and marriage in the previous chapter, Moses proceeds to the sanctification of their union as a congregation and speaks to the right of citizenship, including being gathered before the presence of the Lord to worship him. Most likely, this law did not exclude a person from residence in the area where Israel was to live, but from public offices and honors, intermarriage, and participation in the religious rites at the tabernacle, plus later at the temple. The emasculated, the illegitimate, the Ammonites, and Moabites were not allowed to worship the Lord. The general rule was that strangers and foreigners, for fear of friendship or marriage connections, which could lead Israel into idolatry, were not admissible until their conversion to God and the Jewish faith. This purge, however, describes some limitations to the general rule. Eunuchs, illegitimate children, and people from Ammon and Moab were excluded. Eunuchs were forbidden because such willful mutilation.
What is it? How do you spell eunuch?
EUNUCHS.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Eunuchs, illegitimate children, and people from Ammon and Moab were excluded. Eunuchs were forbidden because such willful mutilation, literally in Hebrew, crushing, which was the way such an act was generally performed, violated God's creation of man.
Well, what's happening with our little transgender children today? That's the first thing I'm thinking about.
Oh.
They're mutilating their bodies and sexual organs. Wow.
Yeah, they are. Such an act was violated. God's creation of man was associated with idolatrous practices and was done by pagan parents for their children, so they might serve as eunuchs in the homes of the great.
The great.
Yeah, it's not capitalized. It references Deuteronomy 25, 11, and 12.
25, 11. When men fight with one another and the wife of one draws near to rescue her husband from the hand of him who is beating him and puts out her hand and seizes him by the private parts, then you shall cut off her hand. Your eyes shall have no pity. When men fight with one another and the wife of one draws near to rescue her husband from the hand of him who is beating him and puts out her hand and seizes him by the private parts, then you shall cut off her hand. Your eyes shall have no pity.
I
What's
don't
that
understand
saying?
what that has to do with the great.
25, 11.
25, 11, and 12. In the homes of the great. I don't know.
I always thought they made them eunuchs so they could go work for the rich people, but there would be no fear that they would get after the wives and so on and so forth.
Can you read that again?
That's what I was thinking great means. When it says great, I was thinking it means like the
The-
wealthy or the
Right.
important or
Okay, eunuchs were forbidden because such willful mutilation, literally in Hebrew, by crushing, which was the way such an act was generally performed, violated God's creation of man, was associated with
Hang on a minute.
idolatry,
Violates God's creation of man.
right? Was associated with idolatrous practices.
In what way is that idolatrous? I'm not following that.
It's what they
Uh,
did when they worshiped these other idols. It's an act. It would have been like getting tattooed for a sign that I'm worshiping this other god.
Oh, so crushing of the testicles is a idolatry of what?
Associated with idolatrous.
practices. It's just one of those things that they do, I guess. I'm assuming as like an outward sign, kind of that this is what I believe, or this is
Yeah, like one of the things they do, Kim, is like sacrifice their children. That was in worship of an idolatrous
Huh,
practice.
Okay.
and was done by parents to their children, so they might serve as eunuchs in the homes of the great.
Okay, so pagan, Paga.
And I don't know what the great is.
Well, I would say they were
wealthy?
basically sacrificing their children. They were taking their children and crushing their testicles so then they could go into the homes of the great.
Which would be what? The powerful, the rich, or
Mm-hmm. Did you say paganist or just pagan parents?
pagan parents.
Okay, parents, so their children could go into the homes of the great.
Yes, so they could serve as eunuchs. So the parents did this to the kids.
What's the service of a eunuch?
I don't know what eunuchs did.
I think they like whatever, like they could have been like the ones that drew, like, let me look it up, but I think they would like serve in whatever position they were.
How did you spell eunuch, Cindy?
EUNUCH.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, what was it again? EUN.
And UCH.
Servants for female royalty as guards of the royal harem and as sexual mates for the nobles. Some attain high status in society. An early example of a high-ranking eunuch was Malik Kafar. They were frequently employed in the imperial palaces by Muslim rulers. They were to protect royal aristocratic women's quarters to serve the women of the court.
So
But
with that said,
also, didn't you say sexual companions or something?
That's
For
what
men,
that-
I'm assuming.
Oh,
yeah,
maybe.
I don't know,
I think that's what it means.
because they'd be no good to a woman.
Listen, a castrated adult male will lose muscle but gain fat. He can expect hot flashes like those that women have at menopause. He will lose body hair and his penis will shrink. Erections will be rare and weak if they occur at all.
Well, isn't that essentially when they're transgender, when they switch over, that there's something like, I don't know if the penis disappears, but I've even heard it's tucked up inside of them. I don't know.
Yes, I saw a thing on that one time where they're actually doing that, where they're basically trying to make like a vagina kind of thing. They tuck it up in, and
Yeah.
I don't know.
When they do the transgender, yeah. And
Yeah,
so you can, yeah, I don't get it. You're never going to function like a woman. All right, sorry.
Well, before I get to this on the illegitimate that it's going to talk about, as we were reading that passage, I thought, well, if a woman is raped and has a baby, that baby's illegitimate, and they can't go into the assembly of the Lord. I guess it explains it a little bit more, but I thought, gee,
That's really
anyway,
harsh because they didn't have a choice.
yeah.
Baby didn't have a choice.
Well, it says the illegitimate were excluded so as to place an indelible stigma as a discouragement to shameful sexual misconduct.
Well, it does have a stigma to it, I guess, or did more so less in our culture, but back in my grandma's culture, it was a big deal if you got pregnant outside marriage.
Yeah, like the Scarlet Letter. She had to wear the letter A, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It
People
does say,
from, go
it
ahead.
does specify shameful, so maybe everybody in the community would know that it, how the child came about, and then it wasn't shameful, it was rape. And they would make a distinguish, I don't know.
Well, remember, if he raped her, he had to marry her. So he wouldn't have been a bastard then.
Which would make it legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
People from Ammon and Moab were excluded, not because they were born out of incest. And there's a reference to that in Genesis 19:30. But on account of their vicious hostility toward God and his people Israel. Many of the Israelites were settled east of the Jordan River in the immediate neighborhood of these people. So God raised this wall to prevent the evils of idolatrous influence.
Okay,
Individual,
oh, sorry.
go ahead.
19.
Yeah, what's that say?
It says, when Lot went up out of Zor and lived in the hills with his two daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zor. So he lived in a cave with his two daughters. And that's when they got pregnant to him. So he is the father of the Ammonites. So the firstborn son was Moab. He's the father of the Moabites. And the younger bore a son, and his name was Ben-Enemi. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. So these two groups of people would have been offspring of Lot to his daughters.
How does a community know though, after after generations and generations, 10 or more, that they're a descendant of an Ammonite or a Moabite, or a product of Lot and his daughters. It's just, I don't know how they distinguish them. And I guess, I mean, nobody would ever know now.
You would take a, what does that need? 23 DNA test, maybe? Well, that's interesting that is.
These people did some crazy stuff. I tell you, that's just, wow. Well, I guess it's no different than today.
Individuals from all three of these outcast groups are offered grace and acceptance by Isaiah upon personal faith in the true God.
Oh, what's that reference in Isaiah?
Isaiah 56, 1-8.
So they were accepted in Isaiah.
Ruth the Moabitess serves as a most notable example. Ruth 1, verses 4 and 16. 23:2-3. To the 10th generation. The use of the word in italics forever is verses 3 and 6 seems to indicate that this phrase is an idiom denoting permanent exclusion from the worshiping community of Israel. In contrast, an Edomite or Egyptian might worship in Israel in the 3rd generation. Though these nations had also been enemies, Edom was a near relative coming from Jacob's family, while individual Egyptians had shown kindness to the Israelites at the Exodus. So I'm taking that these Edomites and these Egyptians, they had to have turned to God and accepted the Jewish faith.
Where did
Before
the Edomites came from? I thought that was Esau.
Is Jacob's family.
Jacob would have been Esau. Yep. Right? Esau,
Right.
Jacob. Oh, no, Jacob's family. Jacob and Esau were the brothers, weren't they? Esau was
Oh, that's right.
his, they would
Esau firstborn, Jacob born second.
so, but the Edomites come from Esau, don't they? I'll look here.
Okay.
One thing I'm learning from Crazy Man is you have to follow the family lines.
Yeah. So who's saying that the generations of the Ammonites and the Moabites will never be able to enter the sanctuary, contrary to Isaiah, which I looked it up. God says, and my blessings are for the Gentiles too. When they accept the Lord, don't let them think I will make them second-class citizens. And this is for the Enochs too. They can be as much mine as anyone. For I say this to the Enochs who keep my Sabbaths holy and choose the things that please me and obey my laws. I will give them in my house within my walls a name far greater than the honor they would receive from having sons and daughters. For the name that I will give them is an everlasting one. It will never disappear. So you'll have to remind me again who's saying in this part of the chapter 23 that they will never enter the sanctuary.
This is Moses giving instruction.
Okay.
Maybe because they were going to be such a new nation, and he was saying you need to stay completely away and get established as a people. You need to keep the evil out. until you get established as a people. The Edomites are descendants of Esau.
You say they are from Esau.
Yeah, the Edomites are descendants of Esau. Did you have more, Cindy?
Oh, no, that's it.
Oh, I feel like I kept interrupting you. All right, whenever you're ready, Kathy.
Here we categorize several miscellaneous laws that were important to life of the nation and that illustrate spiritual truths that are important to us today. And this is that would be in chapters 23 to 25. Entering the assembly, verses 1 to 8. It was a privilege to be a member of the Jewish nation and share in the blessings of God's covenant. The word congregation or assembly may refer to the worshiping assembly and not the nation as a whole. Gentiles could live within the confines of Israel's territory, but that didn't give them the right to share in the feasts and other religious events. Gentiles who submitted to circumcision and confessed Jehovah as the true and living God could become proselytes. And there's a reference to Exodus. But some of them were excluded for various reasons. The Lord has the right to determine who shall enter his holy nation. For one thing, any emasculated male or eunuch was rejected. Priests who had similar defects were prohibited from serving at the altar, although they could eat of the holy food. And there's a reference to Leviticus. And Israel was a kingdom of priests. And there's a reference to Exodus. Therefore, the men entering the nation had to be free from these defects. It's possible that some of the Gentile men had received this surgery as part of their devotion to a heathen god, while Jewish circumcision spoke of belonging to the true God of Israel. The prophet Isaiah looked forward to the day when eunuchs would be welcomed into the kingdom and be blessed of God.
Well, that would be the Gentiles then. That would be us. That's making more sense because he's looking forward to the day when the outsiders would be included.
Right. And there's a reference to Isaiah 56, 3 and 3 to 5 for that. Well, and I know when we were reading about that eunuchs and it said about them not being accepted, my question went to, if the parents did that to the kid and they didn't have a choice, they're not being accepted because of what their parents did to them. And that seemed fair to me, but.
Well, these people, I guess, would be they would not be included because they would be acting out in worship of these other gods.
Right.
But they maybe have a Jewish heritage. Because look at the Ammonites and the Moabites were part of Lot, which they were. He was a Jew, but yet they went the total opposite direction, Jew in name only.
We can rejoice today that physical blemishes and limitations are not a barrier to faith in Jesus Christ and participation in the blessing of the new covenant. And there's a reference to Acts. Illegitimate children were also excluded, although we're not sure what this term meant in ancient Israel. The rabbis interpret it to mean a child born of a forbidden marriage, as the NIV translates it. But what is a forbidden marriage? It could include incestuous marriages or marriages involving rejected nations, Ammonites and Moabites. Why the innocent child should be punished for the sins of the parents. And there is a reference to 24:16. I'm assuming that means Deuteronomy 24.
Fathers shall not be put to death because of their children, nor shall children be put to death because of their fathers. Each one shall be put to death for his own sin.
Okay. Why the innocent children should be punished for the sins of their parents is difficult to understand. The phrase unto the 10th generation means forever. So, Kim, that goes to your, how do you know it's the 10th generation? It's just forever. The Ammonites and the Moabites were descended from Lot. And there's a reference to Genesis, the nephew of Abraham. But they didn't show kindness to their Jewish relatives. Ammonites wouldn't sell them food and water, and Balak, a king of Moab, hired Balaam to curse Israel. Because both nations were related to Israel, the Lord wouldn't permit the Jews to attack them. Their punishment was exclusion from Israel's national blessings forever. However, Ruth, the Moabitess, married Boaz and entered the nation of Israel and became the great-grandmother of King David. And there's a reference to Ruth. And therefore an ancestress of Jesus Christ, a reference to Matthew. She had put her faith in Jehovah, and the Lord accepted her.
Well, that
The
makes sense
Edomite-
because they were Jews and then they didn't take care of their family. Like they were Jews and they refused to help feed them.
The Edomites and the Egyptians could enter the nation in the 3rd generation because the Edomites descended from Jacob's brother Esau, a reference to Genesis. And the Egyptians received Jacob and his family into their land and cared for them. In spite of later Egyptian hostility, God transformed the family of Jacob into a great nation while they sojourned into Egypt. The Amalekites were rejected by the Lord, and Israel was not to forget their evil deeds. They attacked Israel after the nation had come out of Egypt, reference to Exodus, starting with the weary and feeble Jews bringing up the rear of the march. Joshua defeated them, and God declared perpetual war on them. King Saul lost his crown because he failed to exterminate them.
Oh wait, who did he fail to exterminate? The Edomites?
Amalekites.
Oh, can you spell that?
Amalekites.
Okay. That's the people. King Ahab, I think.
Yeah, it says that they were rejected by the Lord, and Israel was not to forget their evil deeds.
King Saul lost his crown because he didn't annihilate them.
Yeah, it says he lost his crown because he failed to eliminate them, and he was slain on the battlefield by an Amalekite.
Who was the Amalekites descendants of?
Um,
I thought you said that. You don't have,
I was wondering how that was connected because they're not mentioned here.
okay. I thought I missed something.
No, I was wondering that too, like how he was connecting them.
Well, it says here they attacked Israel after the nation had come out of Egypt, and there's a reference to Exodus. I don't know if that connects them.
What's that? Exodus
Exodus 17, 8 through 13.
17.
I just looked up the Amalekites.
Yeah.
They are presented as descendants of Amalek, a grandson of Esau.
Amalek.
Yeah,
Descendants of.
grandson of Esau.
Yeah, because 17, what was it? 8 through what?
8 through 13.
So Amalek came and fought against with Israel at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, choose men for us men and go out and fight Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand at the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. So Joshua did just as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses and Aaron and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Well, whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed, and whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and other on the other side. So his hands were steady until the going down of the sun, and Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword. No wonder they thought of Moses kind of as a god. Can you imagine? Like every time his arms got tired, they would lose. AMALE.
And then to finish that up, it just says it wasn't until the time of Hezekiah that the Amalekites finally disappeared from the scene. That's found in First Chronicles
First Chronicles
4:41 through 43.
Well, this history thing's important, isn't it?
Kathy, I have a question. I didn't get to write it down. It was close to the beginning or about a congregation and who could worship, but they couldn't take part of the feast.
Oh,
I think it's about if they were in the family of the priest, the Levite, and they had disfigurement.
No, it was before that.
Oh,
Because they said about they could live in amongst them, but he couldn't be in the congregation.
yeah, it says it was a privilege to be a member of the Jewish nation and share in the blessings of God's covenant. The word congregation may refer to worshiping assembly and not the nation as a whole. Gentiles could live within the confines of Israel's territory, but that didn't give them the right to share in the feasts and other religious events.
So they could live in the nation, but not be part of the congregation.
Right.
well, and when they left Israel or when they left Egypt, keep in mind it wasn't just the Israelites. There were Egyptians who left with them also. Because
Yeah.
remember they were the ones that were murmuring about not having food, which got the Israelites murmuring.
I thought it said they could enter the assembly, but they could not participate in feasts and special events. Is that right? What he said?
It says that they could live within the confines of Israel's territory, but that didn't give them the right to share in the feasts and other religious events. Gentiles who submitted to circumcision and confessed Jehovah as the true and living God could become proselytes. But some of them were excluded for various reasons, and the Lord had to determine who shall enter the holy nation.
Thank you.
That was it that I have.
Oh, okay. 23 might actually get through this whole section. 1 through 8. The prohibition that is included here against a eunuch participating in worship when the people gathered at the tabernacle was not a matter of the person's sin. It was a ceremonial rule meant to teach Israel the need for perfection before the Lord. The ban on people with illegitimate birth would have meant primarily those born of a union between an Israelite and a non-Israelite, for instance, a Canaanite. Their ban was permanent, which is the practical meaning behind the idea of the 10th generation. The Ammonites and the Moabites were also barred because of their cruel treatment of Israel, the Israelites, during their travels in the wilderness, and because the Moabites hired Balaam to curse Israel. Israel's brother were the Edomites, because Israel would be Jacob, so Esau. Israel's brother, the Edomites, and even the Egyptians, however, were to be treated decently. So that's what Israel's doing with the Palestinians. That's why they would allow them to have the land, even though it belonged to Israel. They still treated them with decency, let them live there, let them have the Temple Mount. You know what I mean? Like, they're doing what this said. That's the end.
And when you read that one part, Chrissy, was it in Exodus about them holding Moses' arms up?
Yeah.
One of the or podcast or something, when the war started over there in Israel, one of the girls mentioned that. She said, "Thank you for holding up our arms."
Mhm.
And I didn't know. Well, I knew what it meant because I had read that before, but I like that she said that.
Yeah, I actually forgot the reasoning around it, like why he was doing that. So that was any other thoughts? Crazy Man is really big on following the lines of these people, because it's so connected. But so Esau, today's current day Esau, remember he was the red-haired, red-skinned, that would be Russian descendant. They moved into the Russian area. And then that's also connected with where God tells them that they would not have the fat, and they live in a very cold, non-prosperous kind of area. Where, like, if you look at Russia and the United States is like warm and we have all this abundance and, very blessed. There's a huge difference. All right. If there's nothing else, this will conclude the reading of God's word for today, and we'll pick it back up tomorrow at verse 9. 23, verse 9.